Hi, I'm Nan Simonson, and I want to welcome you to our PowerPoints number 23, Points of Interest that Relate to Lifestyle as Medicine. And today's subject is the power of personal patterns, the power of patterns. Patients from time to time describe to me their desire to make meaningful change in their life, health habits, movement, eating, communication habits, communication and community is all part of the pillars of lifestyle medicine. But then they lament the inability to execute that change. And I hear it so often that I've put a lot of thought into this. And I'm going to say to you, I understand. I spent over 50 years wanting to change a hellish habit. Some of you know about this, some of you don't. It was an eating disorder, one of the worst because it can be hidden. And I hid it for 50 years. My son didn't know, my friends didn't know. The only person who knew was my husband, who passed in 2010 of esophageal cancer after 40 years of marriage. He knew, but nobody else did, but I knew. I knew what I was doing. I lived the truth of that, and it caused shame and a destruction of self-image. And it was an eating disorder, bulimia, that, as I said, could be hidden, but also wreaked havoc on body as well as soul. Binging is what I could call it, binge eating disorder, but it always was followed by purging. Anywhere I was, anytime, and I never knew when a binge was going to start because the trigger was something that I couldn't necessarily control. And it was simply a feeling of fullness. It scared me. Any one of you who have read my book, Aging Powerfully, Accept Your Past and Take Control of Your Future, realize that the first part of the book is memoir. And it was about growing up in a family without a father, but a father who said he left our mother because she got fat, and then made sure I knew that my own weight, which I'm 5'2", and at that time was 126, and I was a young kid, not even out of high school. He kept me hidden away so his clients wouldn't see me because I was fat. It left a mark, and it left a mark that I still struggle with today, but I have been completely free of the eating disorder for over 5 years. So what is the difference between a habit and a pattern? You may be thinking, but Nan, that was all about habits. Well, patterns grow and go more deeply than that. And I'm going to read you something about that to, let's say, clarify. We often confuse habits with patterns, thinking they're synonymous, but they're not. Patterns go one level deeper. It's important to understand the difference so that you can learn how to deal with patterned behaviors and experiences. Most importantly, to release the shame and the judgment you place upon yourself when you're engulfed in self-sabotaging habits. When it comes to habits, most people feel that the answer is willpower and discipline, and it's true, but only to a certain extent, because under specific conditions and during an appropriate stage of the healing process, we come to realize that deep down, we all have subconscious mind controls that come into play. They are, people are aware of symptoms such as overeating or procrastination. So they work on that to accomplish better habits, more control. But what they're missing is how they are trapped in recurring patterns, doing more of the same because the patterns we play out over and over. Just the way we do, for example, when we put on our clothes and put on a jacket and put the same arm in every time first, or the way we tie our shoe, or the way we brush our teeth. So I'm going to talk about patterns because I learned something. And let me first define the word. A pattern as a noun means a regular or this is a simple definition of many, a regular and intelligible form or sequence discernible in certain actions and situations. As a verb, give a regular or intelligible form to a pattern of something that we're after, to give something form based on something observed. In other words, I'm going to pattern myself after a event or a situation and take on a likeness to that. How many days and weeks and months and years, I said 50, was I trying to change? And yet, through therapists, organizations like OA and that's Overeaters Anonymous, and Weight Watchers, and interventions, how many times did I try and nothing changed it? Changed, I thought, every habit I had, but nothing changed the fact that when I was triggered and I overate and I binged, because why not? I've already gone this far. The purge followed. Two things changed that, and they had something to do with patterns, not just habits. The first was a book I read, and I've talked about this before, Brain Over Binge, where Dr. Turner, and actually Dr. I'm sorry, I'm mixing up authors, where Catherine Hansen, there's a book that I love, and this has nothing to do with what I'm talking about, but Dr. Turner wrote a book, and during the writing of that book earned her PhD, and the book was Radical Remission, and it's about over 1,000 cases, it might be 1,500, of remission from disease that was claimed to be by all medical records incurable. In other words, they were terminal, and they recovered. And so she wrote a book about how and why that happened, and then 9 commonalities of those people. But that's another talk and another time. Brain Over Binge is Catherine Hansen's book after Radical Recovery, a book that was written about addicts, drug, alcohol addicts, but she read it. She had an eating disorder throughout college and after that she couldn't stop. And she figured if this method worked for people who were addicted to substances, it must be able to work for someone who just couldn't stop eating. And it did for her. And she had always promised during her years of her bulimia, but her bulimia was an exercise, not a purging situation. In other words, binge and then exercise for hours or days or whatever to make up for it. And so she wrote this book, and she said if she ever recovered, she would write a book and tell people what she did. Well, what she learned from Radical Recovery, which was, again, the book about the success with addicts, was that we could change our thinking, change our mind, i.e. change a pattern of thought that could relieve us from what we thought was the imperative to live out the decision. What I learned from that was that my limbic brain, which some people call the lizard brain, she calls it the lower brain, the limbic brain, which is the one that keeps us alive, the heart beating, the food digesting, our basic survival bodily functions, also keeps us doing what maintains a homeostasis. And in my case, the binging began at 14, first anorexia, then bulimia, and just kept going. And I kept playing out my brain's message to me, if then, in other words, if you overeat, you might as well binge. If you binge, you might as well purge, rinse and repeat. And I did it again and again. Well, what I learned was that I could break that pattern by ignoring it. That was the point. Now, it's much more complicated than just that, but that was really her point. You ignore the desire, you ignore the message from the brain saying, do this thing. I didn't have to understand it. I didn't have to dig deep into emotional trauma. It had nothing to do with all of that. And I knew that that wasn't the cause of my binging and eating, because throughout my life in all those years, I had so many happy moments, so many successes, so much to be grateful for, and still would do the same behavior. So in any case, I learned when the thoughts came up, you did this, now do that, to ignore them and simply do something else, not give it energy, not give it emotion, just do something else until the feeling passed. And it did. And as soon as I learned that I could do that, I was free to a degree. But there was one other thing I had to do. I had to change the pattern of food that I was eating, because those foods not only were toxic, in other words, highly processed, sugary, fatty foods that I had learned to prefer, but they were also addictive. Some people say you can't have a food addiction. I think you can, and there are a number of people who believe you can, because all of the actions played out by one who is addicted to food, be it sugary, be it salty, be it crispy and fatty, whatever it is, it will have the same predispositions that someone that is an addict has. They do what they know they don't want to, they do it anyway. They know that it could be the decline of them, and they do it anyway. It could have cost me my life, but I did it anyway. As a matter of fact, if you read Aging Powerfully, and again, this is just a small part of the book, because then it goes on to not even recovery from eating disorder, but how I changed my life with lifestyle as medicine, and then the pillars of lifestyle medicine. But yeah, at 17, I even tried to kill myself because I couldn't stop eating and purging, and nothing I did changed that. Well, so I learned that the foods that I was eating just triggered me. And so I changed that by going whole food, plant-based. I was a health coach by then, well, almost a health coach by then. I'd finished more than a year of training, close to my certification, learned the value of a plant-based diet, learned the value of understanding caloric density, learn the value of how fiber fills you up, how potatoes are satisfying and satiating, how carbohydrates aren't the devil. With my body and my system, the way I am now, it's been 5 years. I maintain my weight easily. I stay at about 115. I'm 5'2". And I can do that easily without even thinking about it if I follow the precepts of the College of Lifestyle Medicine, and that is whole food, plant-based. I keep it clean with SOS, salt, oil, sugar. Those are very low. As a matter of fact, I don't do processed sugars, because there's no point to. I stick with whole foods like dates, whirled up in a blender with some water, and they become a sweet syrup, and that goes into any desserts I make. So that's just part of what I'm talking about today. I understand that that patterns can own us. But then I looked at, because when some people struggle, I look at our society now, and so many people are health-wise broken. You see it. I'm almost 73. I'm less than a month away from 73, and I feel stronger and healthier than I have in decades. And then I look at people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s who are going through a black hole, or into a black hole of one health crisis after another, pills and procedures, and a lifetime of believing that that is the course of their life, not getting well with the pills and procedures, usually simply mitigating symptoms, but the illnesses keep mounting. What is that about? Well, it's about our, I'm going to say, sad American diet, the SAD, and the things that we've been led to believe as a pattern that we see throughout our entire society that we should do for entertainment, for food, and for nutrition. And that is eat whatever you want, just control the amounts. Well, if you're an addict, you don't control things. I tried a long time. The other thing is that the foods that we're being offered are foods that keep you addicted. You can't keep eating the salty, oily, sugary foods and be able to keep the volume down. And everywhere we go, every restaurant, I go to vegan restaurants, and that's what they're serving because the people want it so badly. Fried foods, things that just hit their pleasure center, go straight to the brain with dopamine pings. So I wanted to get that out there because when I wrote this subject, the power of personal patterns, I wasn't even thinking of this conversation I'm having with you. I was just thinking of, well, but it's so easy for me now. And why is it so easy? Then I realized I've come through changes that were deeper than just habits. They went into patterns. They went into patterns of behavior. I changed a pattern of the way I ate. I changed the pattern of the way I moved. And actually, one of the things that maybe kept me healthy in spite of the way that I was treating my body is that I did have a pattern for most of my life of early morning exercise. I loved, and I still do and still do it, rolling out of bed. Everything's ready for what I'm going to do next, which is either a walk or a run. I took up running at 70. But I'm not running now. I have a messed up meniscus, but that's okay because I still walk and I cycle because that doesn't hurt my knee at all. And I cycle every morning as I did this morning. And I love the feeling. And then every evening we walk. I just got a weighted vest. I'm turning around as if it's right behind me because it kind of is, because I understand that that helps with adding a little bit more weight to the foot strike when I'm walking so that I can help build up my bones. My bones are good, but they need to be better because all of us start losing muscle mass and bone strength. It's just part of getting older, and we have to meet that, match what it takes to keep the muscles strong, and then maybe get a little stronger because we're going to need a little more as our balance becomes a little weaker. And in other words, patterns. Knowing what is going to happen next, doing it in order throughout the day based on where we see ourselves. So I'm going to let this go at one last thing, and that is, something that I read that Tony Robbins talked about it as it relates to patterns. He said he gave us 3 steps to developing an understanding of the power that patterns have over us and how we can take control back. Now, it won't be as easy as my reading 3 sentences, but it might get you started because if I said to you, look at your life, look at what you're happy with, look at what isn't working for you. What are the patterns? What are the underlying beliefs? I believed if I didn't binge and eat, that I wouldn't, binge and purge. First of all, that I couldn't live a healthy life because I would get fat no matter what. Didn't happen because I made certain choices that became a pattern. And I also believed because it had gone on so long that it was something that I couldn't give up. It would make me too sad because in a way that was the thing I did when I was stressed or happy or sad. That's how I celebrated with food. And I thought I could never do that again. That was not true. That was something that was changed by, again, a pattern. So this is what he said, or what he says. So think of your own. as I go through these, and then the possibilities. Recognize the patterns in your life. Things that look like chaos until we learn to recognize, or things look like chaos until we learn to recognize patterns. What isn't working? What do we see that seems out of sync in our life? What is the pattern there? What keeps that going? Number two, learn to use patterns. Muster the discipline to create habits that will redirect you, to get yourself to do the things that you don't want to do. Ultimately leads to habits, but ultimately changes patterns. And then three, build on what you learn from others. Watch their patterns. The most successful people in the world do this. And if you read Aging Powerfully, you'll see that that's what I did from the time I was living in a room in an art gallery, and one lady whom I looked up to gave me some time, some attention, and helped me build my self-esteem with some very simple words. And I looked at her and I said, maybe I can be like that someday. And then a college professor, maybe I can be like that someday. And then somebody in a business that I began ultimately because of her. And I became that one day. And that was because I watched for patterns. What did they do? How do they do it? What does it look like? Imagined how it would feel, and then emulated it. Recognize the patterns in your life. Learn to use these patterns. Muster some discipline to get them to become a habit. And then build on what you learn by watching others and emulating them and where you want it to take you. I think that's it on that subject. I want to thank you for being with me during this time. I hope something resonated with you. Consider Aging Powerfully. It's a decent read. Subscribe to my YouTube channel, and you're welcome to join us on our PowerPoints group, because as soon as I finish today, we'll have a conversation about this. And you can write me at Aging Powerfully with Nan at gmail.com, and I'll send you the link. Have a great day, because I know I'm going to. Bye-bye.